Hi guys, this is John from Walton's and we're here with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. We're also here with John Wipfli from Anamale's Barbecue, and this is going to be part of a series we're calling Bird in the Bag. We're trying to help you take the success you're having in the field and translate that to the table. These are going to be one-stop shop videos where we're going to give you links to all the products, seasoning, anything you need, and we're going to give you all the knowledge to make delicious tasting wild game recipes. So today we're going to make quail meatballs with smashed potatoes and a mango habanero glaze.
Pretty excited about this. We have some quail, and we're going to add some bacon to it. Deboned all the quail. We just have quail meat, obviously, and then we're going to mix it with some cooked down garlic and onions and thyme, and we're going to grind everything together once that mixture is cool, and then we're going to make meatballs out of that. And then on the side, we're gonna have some potatoes that are already cooked. We already boiled them in salty water for about 30 minutes until they're just soft. And we're gonna smash them with our hands and then fry them in a pan so the edges get really nice and crispy. And then we're gonna take those meatballs and glaze them in a little quail stock. And then right before they're done cooking, we're gonna add a big spoonful of this mango habanero jam, and it's gonna make those meatballs a little bit spicy, a little bit sweet, and just give them a nice coating over the outside of them.
You can't go wrong. You've got quail, we've added a little bit of pheasant in there. Yep. We've got bacon, and that mango habanero jam is absolutely delicious. I'm super excited for this. Okay, so what's the first thing we want to do?
So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna take our onions and our chopped garlic and our thyme, and we're gonna put those into a saute pan with a little oil and just let those sweat for 10 or 15 minutes until they're completely softened.
Okay.
For this recipe, we're cooking for maybe 2 or 3 people, depending on how much you eat. So this is about 1.5 cups of onions, about 1 tablespoon of garlic, and then we have about 1 tablespoon of thyme. But you can really adjust those amounts however you want. If you like things more oniony or garlicky, obviously just add a little bit more. You're not really gonna do too much wrong. Other component to this that we are cooking today, or we're gonna use in our meatballs, is something called a panade. And a panade is basically a bread that's soaked in milk. There's other forms of panade, but this is a form we're gonna use today. And what that does is it helps the meatballs retain moisture. So you can cook them a little harder and they'll still be really soft and moist. So we're gonna soak that bread in milk until it's kind of swampy texture.
Okay.
And then we're gonna grind it with everything else through the grinder, and then form them into meatballs and sear them off.
So that's going through the grinder as well?
Yep, it is.
Whole milk, 1%, 2%?
I always use whole milk,
okay.
But you can use whatever's in your pantry. There's no really right or wrong here. Your meatball's gonna turn out good no matter what kind of milk you use.
Excellent. All right, so let's get these in the saute pan and then we'll get to grinding.
Sounds great.
All right, so here we've got the Walton's number 8 grinder. It is the perfect size grinder for batches like this. Doesn't take up a ton of room. We're easily gonna be able to grind through all of this. And the best news is you get out of the purchase just a couple $100.
Yep.
Not gonna break the bank. And for small batches, it's absolutely perfect. So we're gonna grind our pheasant and quail. We're gonna add the bacon, because, I mean, why not? Absolutely should add bacon. And you sauteed, would you call these saute or sweat?
We sauteed those until, then the process is kind of sweating. And it's just garlic, onion, and fresh thyme.
Okay.
And then we took it out of the pan when everything was kind of soft and translucent, and we put it in the refrigerator for a little bit so it cooled down.
Yep.
So that we don't start the cooking process on the meat before we want to.
Yep, we did the same thing. We took advantage of that little break and we threw the quail and the pheasant in the freezer as well. Keep everything nice and cold. When you're making any type of ground product, heat is your enemy. Get everything as cold as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And not only for safety reasons, the more you expose surface area to protein, the faster it can start to turn on you. But it's also good for the grinding process to have things cold to avoid something called smearing, which is where basically the grinder just pushes out protein without actually cutting it. So keeping it cold will avoid that process too.
And that overworks the protein, starts destroying it, so we want to avoid that.
Yep.
So we're going to put everything in this bowl and then grind it all together, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put milk on our cut bread, and that's going to be our panade.
Okay.
And we want that to sit for a couple minutes and just kind of soak up. So soak up some of the milk. So I'm going to pour this over. And then I'm going to actually just take this and just kind of mash it with my hand.
Okay.
And you can see it's kind of turning into like a swampy texture.
Yep.
It's exactly where we want it. This is just a plain white bread. You can use pretty much any kind of bread, but I like just a plain white bread for this because it really soaks up the milk. And so it's already progress.
Absorbed it. Yep.
The milk's almost gone, and you just have that like semi-mushy texture. There's hardly any milk left in the bowl. That's how
Right.
you know you're using the right amount of milk to bread. And I'm gonna let this sit while we mix the rest of the ingredients. So first, into this mixing bowl, we're gonna put our quail and a little bit of pheasant. I'm gonna put that right in there.
And we added the pheasant just to bulk it out, right?
Yeah, we had a little extra pheasant, and why not make a few extra meatballs if you have
Definitely
it
don't want
laying
to
around.
throw it out.
Now we have just a little bit of bacon. It's probably about a third of the total volume, maybe a quarter of the total volume of meat. The bacon's gonna give it a nice smoky quality. It's also going to add some fat into the meatball, which, you know, pheasant and quail don't have a ton of fat.
Definitely need some.
So this is going to help that process as well.
Thick cut, thin cut, does it matter?
It doesn't really matter because we're going to end up putting it through the grinder. So anything will do. I like a little bit smokier bacon for this, just so you get that smoky flavor throughout. Okay. And then we're going to add our onion and garlic and thyme mixture. So that's in there. And then we're gonna add one seasoning. And if you wanna pull over the one closest to you, this is our bold barbecue quail seasoning. So it's gonna have a little bit of barbecue flavor to it that you might, get from smoking something.
Sure.
So we're gonna have smoke from the bacon and then that kind of barbecue rub flavor.
Some nice sweetness to it.
Yep.
A little bit of smoke both from that and from the bacon.
Exactly. I'm gonna add about 1.5 tablespoons.
Okay.
We're gonna start there. And then, whenever I cook meatballs, what I do is we'll grind it and then we'll taste a little bit. And then if we want to add more seasoning, more salt, more anything, we can do that. Okay. And then we'll re-season it and then make meatballs. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt to this, which we haven't done yet.
Okay.
And when you're doing this, you have to remember that we also added salt to the onion mixture.
Right.
So we already have a little bit of salt in there. I'm gonna add a little bit more because it looks like a little more protein than I anticipated.
Okay.
And then lastly, we're gonna add this panade, which has soaked up all the milk. And we're gonna add, not quite all of it, I'm just looking at amounts here. This is also probably about 1/4 of the volume is panade. And then we're just gonna mix everything in this bowl together and run it through the grinder.
Okay. So we're dealing with about 1/4 of the panade and 1/4 in bacon, rest in quail or pheasant.
Yep, okay. So the majority of it should be your pheasant and quail, and then a little bit of the panade and a little bit of bacon.
Cool.
So we got this mix. I'm gonna go wash my hands before we start using the grinder.
Okay.
And I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
So now we have everything mixed up. Should be good to go. Here's our grinder. Everything's attached properly. I mean, that's a big thing, obviously. We're just gonna click it on. And then start passing our protein through the grinder.
Yep, and you can see everything coming out there nicely, chewing right through that meat. And you can see it's mixing everything together as you're grinding it. That is one of the advantages of putting your seasoning, everything in before you run it through the grinder. Downside is cleanup, usually a little bit more difficult that way, but that's doing 90% of the mixing for us.
Yep, absolutely. And the other benefit to this is when making meatballs, you want to do something called a primary bind, which basically whips the meat or makes the meat sticks to itself a little more. So in a restaurant setting, we'll be doing huge batches and we'll run it into like a giant KitchenAid and we'll whip it in there. Here, I don't want to dirty a lot of dishes. And so what we'll do is we'll just use our hands.
Right.
And we'll just mix it with our hands and it'll get that primary bind.
Okay.
And then we'll start making meatballs.
We do the same thing when we're making sausage, so I'm well versed in protein extraction.
These look great. All right, I'm gonna wash my hands once again. We're gonna get out a little olive oil.
Okay.
And that'll help coat our hands. We'll coat our hands with that, and that'll prevent sticking to the meatball. And then we're gonna fry them up.
Okay. All right, so a lot of people have had turkey meatballs, chicken. How is this gonna differ from that?
So obviously it'll have a little bit more pheasant flavor, but when I think of meatballs, you know, growing up, I usually ate pork or beef meatballs.
Yeah.
I really think these kind of upland bird or these poultry meatballs, they just take in more flavor from outside sources. So we have a lot of onion, garlic, thyme in there. You're really gonna taste that, it's gonna come through. But then also when we coat them in this mango jam, it's really gonna shine. So it's a good canvas to put other flavors into. And then adding that panade, which we added, really helps keep them moist too. So next step here is just rolling them out. So one tip that I always do when rolling them out, or use when rolling them out, I always coat my fingers in a little oil. It can be grapeseed oil, avocado oil, olive oil, doesn't really matter. But it's gonna help the meat not stick to your fingers as much.
Okay.
So I just take my hand, coat it in a little olive oil, and then roll out meatballs about the size of a golf ball, I'd say.
That's what we're looking for?
Yep.
And how tightly am I trying to pack them?
I don't really pack them tight at all. I just roll them.
Just loosely?
Put them on here. That one's mine's a little too big. You got the
so
right
that's
size.
the right size. Huge surprise, I did something right.
You nailed it.
And so a lot of people add breadcrumbs to their meatballs. What's the panade you decided to make? Is that something you picked up in your barbecue days, your French cooking days?
Yeah, the panade it's just a pretty classic binder. There's also a dish called panade, and it's basically, my understanding of it, it's just a dish where you use bread and milk, or it could be some other absorbent or some other liquid that absorbs into bread to flavor something, or B, just keep moisture in it. So in this case, it's mainly moisture, but it does add a little flavor too.
Cool.
So how many do we get there? About 8 dozen?
Close to a dozen.
All right, and I'm gonna wash my hands once again. Okay, so now that the meatballs, they're all rolled out, they're ready to fry, we're gonna start working on our potatoes, which is a really easy process. These are already boiled, and they're boiled in salt water.
Okay.
And all we have to do is take them in between our hands and just kind of smash them. Just like that, so they still hold together.
Too much?
That's a little too much.
Okay.
Strong guy. But what we're gonna do here is now we're gonna take these and we're gonna fry them in like a high temp oil.
Okay.
And all these little edges are gonna get really nice and crispy, and those will go great with our potatoes.
Not quite as hard.
Meatballs.
More like that.
That's perfect.
Cool. And it's kind of fun.
It is kind of
I
fun.
don't mind that at all. Satisfying. The olive oil trick was a good one. One of the things that's going on right now, it's super hard to find nitrile, latex, whatever gloves. There's a shortage of them again. So that is a really good tip for somebody who's doing this at home.
And so this looks like all the potatoes our pan can hold.
Okay.
So I think we're gonna call it good there.
Sounds good.
And we're gonna move over to the stove.
Let's go. All right, so we've got all our pans nice and hot. We've got the oil going. What are we putting in first?
All right, so we're gonna start with meatballs. So the oil's in this pan. Like you said, it's nice and hot. And we're gonna add our meatballs one at a time, and we're gonna try and brown each side of the meatball.
Okay.
And you can hear that sizzle, that's a good sign that we're not gonna have any sticking issues. It's also a good sign that we're gonna get some nice browning color on the meatballs.
So we've got that Maillard effect or reaction there that's gonna give us that nice little a texture and some extra sweetness, caramelization for color. And it looks like in the back, those are already cooking real fast.
Yeah, they'll move pretty quick.
Wow.
There's just starting to color.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn the heat up on this a little bit and just kind of let it go.
Okay.
I'm gonna add a little bit more oil to this pan too.
And we're gonna wait for them to cook a little bit before we add some more of this. Okay.
Before we add stock, we want to get these things cooked on the outside fully.
Okay.
And then the stock is going to help aid the finishing.
Gotcha.
The finishing product.
Okay.
And now, so potatoes are going in here. You can see this burner a little bit higher. It's just starting to smoke. The oil's really loose, so you know it's hot.
Yep.
I'm going to dip a potato in, make sure we get a little bubbling. We're getting that.
Okay.
So
Yep.
throw
See
them all
it,
in.
hear it. And that was good. You were really aware of the size pan we had to work with. Had we done all of those, they would have been sitting around doing nothing. You don't want to overfill your pan.
Yeah.
It'll make everything cook slower and unevenly.
Yeah, you're exactly right. If you crowd the pan, you won't get those nice brown, crispy bits, and that's kind of what you want to achieve. And you can see this pan kind of leans back a little bit, so I'm just putting the potatoes where the oil is.
Okay.
And what we'll probably do here also is crisp them in the oil and then drain off some of the oil and continue to cook them so they get a little crispier. There.
So if they continue to cook in all that oil, will they get a little soggy? Is that...
Yeah, they'll get a little soggy, but it's easier to get a crispier texture if you pour off a little
bit less.
Yep. Okay. So we'll just let them do their thing for a
go.
while in there.
Okay.
I'm going to throw a pinch of salt in there as well.
More salt very rarely hurt anything.
And you could add any other seasoning really you wanted to.
Okay.
If you wanted to do like a spicy blackened potato, you could do that. If you wanted to add fresh thyme and garlic in there right at the end, and that'd be delicious too.
Okay.
So, endless possibilities over there. These meatballs, I can hear them. They're really starting to get some good color. There's a good one.
Okay.
So we're gonna start
Flip it. Okay.
flipping
Now
them.
you said on every side, so does that mean you're going to turn them on their sides as well, or are you going to rely on it to cook through and around?
No, we'll keep flipping them for a little bit here, and we'll
Okay.
try and get as many sides as possible brown. And then as soon as that happens, we'll pour our stock in there.
Go.
So the meatballs you can obviously see are getting crispy.
Yep.
And these potatoes kind of started to. You can see those crispy little bits forming on the skin. We just want to get a ton of that. So I'm actually going to crank the heat up even further over here.
Okay.
Try and get that oil more evenly dispersed and just let those guys go.
Okay. So a lot of things you do like this. Are you looking at making it with a different protein and think, hey, I wonder how that would be with pheasant or quail or some other upland game, or how do you come up with some of these things?
Yeah, a lot of these recipes you can use across the board for a lot of different proteins.
Okay.
And then you kind of just will adjust the seasoning. So, you know, I think obviously using a poultry seasoning for poultry goes great.
Makes sense.
And then if you're doing something with a stronger flavor like venison, for example, you probably want to use something stronger, maybe like rosemary herbs or rosemary type herbs, or maybe like paprika and chili powder things. Here we're kind of sticking to more lighter things. We did use a barbecue rub here, but you just kind of look at your protein that's your canvas, and then whatever things you think taste good with that, you just apply it to the recipe and try it with a new protein.
Well, rosemary and pheasant, it's not one that a lot of people tend to think of, but it goes so well together. We have a rub, rosemary, basil, and thyme, and just a nice backstrap covered in that really works well.
Any fresh herbs you can pretty much pair up with anything. They're just delicious.
Yeah, sometimes we get so caught up in these new, like, extreme tasting rubs that you forget that sometimes just a fresh herb is the best way to go.
Absolutely. And now on these potatoes, you can see, if you look in there, you can see how it's getting a little bit black, really dark brown. That's exactly what we're looking for on those. And so I'm going to probably flip it over again to continue that, but you can see those edges
coming through.
That's what you want.
Yep.
And if they break up a little bit, you see a piece fell off.
Yeah.
That's going to be the best tasting piece of the whole day.
Those have some nice color to them.
Yeah. So as you can see here, we're developing a ton of really nice colors, and they're probably about, say, 50% cooked through at this point. So I'm going to drain off a little bit of the oil.
So For this type of cooking, having a bowl on the side that you can just pour your extra oil into. Good tip. You seem to do it a lot.
Yeah, it's an excellent thing just to have around because you never really know if you're going to need to add a little bit or get rid of a little bit. And in this circumstance, we did both with that bowl, so it's a great thing.
Okay.
So now I'm going to add a little of this stock, and that's going to do a few things too. It's going to help just keep everything nice and moist, but also that stock is going to give some richness, like a ton of richness to our final sauce.
Yeah.
And then it's going to take up flavor from the meatballs too. So stock's been made, which is already really flavorful, but it's going to get an extra boost of flavor from the meatballs. So that'll be a nice stock to pour over everything. And so these are getting crisp. You can see how crispy those skins are getting.
Right on the edges, yep. Anywhere it's smashed, it is nice and brown.
That's a great one.
Now I internal temp a lot of things.
Yep.
What would you be going for internal temperature on these if you were? Does it just matter how much you smash them? It could be different.
Yeah, so internal temperature doesn't really matter at this point for a potato, but you just want to look for these crispy bits.
Okay, so
right
it's
there.
all visual.
It's all visual, and just feel them. And if they're crispy, they're probably going to be good. And if they're really soggy, then they have to cook a little longer.
Okay.
So one thing when I'm making meatballs, one way to feel if they're done without having a thermometer is you just kind of feel them. And if they feel firm to the touch when you squeeze them, that's a good indicator that they're done and cooked all the way through. These need maybe another 2 or 3 minutes before they're all the way done. If they're really soft to the touch, that's an indicator that they're still raw. So let them cook for a longer amount of time. And you can just feel them throughout the cooking process, and it's pretty easy to tell the change or see the change and feel the change. While those are cooking down, though, I'm going to add a knob of butter.
Okay.
And that's going to do, that's obviously going to flavor things. But the other thing it's going to do is help thicken that stock. So butter's a great thickening agent. We just don't want to reduce it too far after the butter's in there, because then the butter will separate from the sauce. That's kind of a greasy base, but a little bit of butter will go a long way here. Add another pinch.
And so how long are the mango habanero jam? That's going in just at the very end?
Right at the very end, and we're just going to lightly cook it and start to glaze the meatballs with it. And so what I'm looking for is I just want this stock to be maybe 25% more reduced.
Okay.
So it has just a pretty thick viscosity, maybe something like maybe like a syrup or a chocolate syrup or something.
Okay.
So we have a little bit longer to go, but a good thing to do here is just put your finger in here and taste this for salt, and that's going to be good.
That is going to be very good.
Pheasant stock and butter.
Yep.
It's pretty good. And these guys look like they're pretty much done.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn the heat off. They're crispy on both sides. They look pretty delicious.
Oh, that is a good one.
And this is a great dish. This whole thing, actually, if you want to make these potatoes, you want to boil them the day ahead. It's really easy to do if you want to make your meatballs a day ahead. So if you're cooking for a large group, so you can just heat them up the next day. Really easy to make this whole thing ahead. Fry these the day of. Rewarm these with more stock, and they'll be just as good as when you cook them the first time. All right, so I can see that's getting thick. So I'm going to add a big drop of this stuff. Big drop of jelly. That's going to give us a bunch of sweetness, a little bit of heat.
Okay.
And then we're just going to glaze the meatballs with that.
Yeah, so that jam is melting nice and fast. It's getting right down into the rest of your stock.
Pull that out.
A little bit out.
We'll put a little too much in there.
Okay.
That'll happen. And then we're going to, again, let that kind of reduce and tighten up.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, you can really see it glazing them. I mean,
Yeah.
once you put it on, the look of them changes, the reflection, the amount of light coming off them changes. That looks like candy.
And you can see up here, we're kind of doing this basting trick. And you can see up here the jam's starting to kind of caramelize up there. So that'll make for a little deeper flavor as well.
Okay.
Okay, those look like they're pretty good. Okay, so it's time to plate. We have our potatoes, they're nice and hot, they're nice and crispy. And we have our meatballs over here. And then on the side, we just made a little garnish of jalapenos that were just thinly sliced and then coated in sugar. And so we're kind of playing off the mango, the sweet with the mango heat over here. Add a little bit more of that, you know, because I like heat.
Sure.
So let's just start by taking these potatoes out, lay a few of them down. And then meatballs are over here and we'll do the same thing.
Looks delicious. I cannot wait to try these. Are you gonna try and get a little bit of that juice on the potatoes, or just let them stay?
Gonna let it kind of go over the potato or go over the meatballs so that we don't lose any of the crispiness on the potatoes. So I'm gonna pour this over these guys. You can see it kind of dripping into the potatoes, so you will get a little bit on there.
Okay.
And then we have these nice little jalapenos just as a garnish. You don't have to eat them if you don't want, but they go great on the side.
They look great and coated in sugar, cut down on the heat from those a little bit, right?
Yeah, it'll mellow them out a little bit, but if you want a little extra spice in a bite, you just grab one of those and you got it.
Sure. Should we try to get some all together? Should we eat them separately? What's the best way?
You know, it's your call, but I really want to get into one of those meatballs first. They look pretty good.
Let's do it.
Thanks.
Catch a little bit of that jalapeno. That's excellent. You absolutely hit it out of the park with that yet again.
Well, thanks. The mango glaze adds a ton of flavor to it, and you know, once you get those meatballs, if you get the texture right, that glaze is going to give you a home run. So it's great.
Absolutely delicious. Let's try some of your smashed potatoes. On the bottom of it, I got a little bit of that glaze, pop of sweetness, little bit of heat. Really good.
Excellent. Glad you like it. This is a great dish for you know, pheasant camp or bird camp, and feed a lot of hungry guys with this one.
And like you said, you can cook a lot of this the day before and then just reheat it up and just as good, right?
Yep, exactly.
Well, this is absolutely delicious. Couldn't be more impressed with this.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.